First and foremost, I want to give all honor, all glory, all praises be to the Most High God, Yahawah, in the name of who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, Hamashiach Yahweh Shai. This is Yahweh's Daggers back at you with another lesson, another week, right? Getting into the history of the Greek Jews, right? Essentially, we're going to all the verses in the New Testament that mention Jews and Greeks, or just Greeks in general, right? So first, I'm gonna just state the position in which we're coming from is that every time Greeks are mentioned in the New Testament, it is in fact referring to Israelites or Jews, right? I'm gonna just state that up front, out the door, right? But I'm gonna go to all these verses because according to the mainstream Christendom, as they like to say, but the mainstream of Christianity, right? They'll go to all these verses in the New Testament that speak about Greeks as to say, see, everybody, all nations, all men, all people can be grafted in, so to speak, right? And we're just gonna break down the whole understanding of what is a Jew and what is a Greek, right? So let me share my screen. So the first verse that Christians like to go into, which we went into the last 2 weeks, we went throughout this whole chapter in Galatians, right? But the reason why I'm starting here again, because Christians like to isolate verses without getting proper context and understanding, right? So they'll go to Galatians 3 and 28 and say, see, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you're all one in Christ Jesus, right? And every time a Christian will pull this verse up, the first thing that a lot of Hebrew Israelites respond to them and say is, are you a Greek or are you a Jew? Most of the times people aren't Greeks and they aren't Jews. And they'll try to use this verse. Okay, see, well, how does this apply to you? It doesn't mention any other nations here other than Greek, right? And then there's neither male nor female. So are we to say that there's no difference between what a man is and what a woman is? No, because they'll go to that verse and say that there's a difference between there's no difference between a Jew and a Greek. It's all the same. We got to address the male nor female part. Is there no difference between male and female? Obviously, that's not the case. But we know in Galatians, the third chapter, the context is pertaining to the promise of the Abrahamic covenant that was passed down to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the context in Galatians 3 is specifically talking about Israelites in general, right? When you just read the chapter. But then they'll completely throw that out the window and they'll go to other verses as if they just didn't hear what you just said, right? So let's go to some other verses that Christians like to use and go to try and support their claim on what they say about the Most High replacing Israel with other nations and singling out verses that mention Greeks. All right, let's go to Romans 1. The book of Romans, chapter 1, and verse 16, right? And it reads, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek, right? So Christians will go to a verse like this and say, see, salvation is to everyone that believeth, to the Jew, and then also to the Greek. So they'll go to a verse like this and say, see, all nations, all people can be saved, right? Even the verse prior, verse 14, right, where it says, I am indebted to both the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and unwise, right? So we're going to get into why it's mentioning Greeks, right? And why it's mentioning Jews and Greeks, right? I'm going to go to another verse, right? So right now I'm just getting all the verses that Christians will go to. And then next week, we're going to bar for bar break down every majority of the verses, right, that Christians use to try to use this replacement theology. We're gonna get into the concept of what does it everyone mean? Does all mean all? Does everyone mean everyone? But for the purpose of tonight, we're gonna focus on Greek, right? Let's see, Romans 10 and 12. Right, the book of Romans, chapter 10, verse 12. For there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek, for the same Lord over all is rich unto all that call upon his name. Right? So there again, right? If there's no difference between a Jew and a Greek, then it means everybody can be saved. And then it says, oh, look, Lord over all, right? And then they'll read, whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved, right? Like I said, next week we'll get into the whole concept of whosoever, right? Well, look, there's no difference between a Jew and a Greek. Why would Paul say that? Why would Paul just say there's no difference between Jews and Greeks, right? Well, stay tuned and we're going to break down what is the difference between a Jew and a Greek, and is there a difference between a Jew and a Greek? Right? The book of Colossians, chapter 3, verse 11. Whether there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond or free, but Christ is in all and in all. Right? Another verse that mentions Greeks and Jews, right? And then the circumcision or uncircumcision, right? Another verse that Christians would use in reference to um, pertaining to Greeks, right? To try to prove their point that anybody and everybody can be saved, right? Let me get two more, right? I'm saying Christians right now are probably going to be thinking the hell out of me because I'm giving them more fuel than they knew existed because they don't read. That's why if you've been around Hebrew Israelites long enough, you'll hear us say that we make the best Christians, man, because we the most studied. Because even a Christian don't study this much. Galatians 2 and 3, but neither Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. So now they'll go to a verse like this and say, well, Titus, right? One of the people that was cooling with Paul, right? He was a Greek. He wasn't an Israelite. He wasn't a Jew. They'll say he wasn't an ethnic or a bloodline Jew or Israelite. They'll go to this verse to try to substantiate that claim, right? Let's see if there's another one. Acts 16 and 1. Right? Here's another account. Then came he to Derbe and Lystria, right? I'm gonna butcher these names. And behold, a certain disciple was there, a man named and was there named Timotheus, right, the son of a certain woman, which she was a Jewess and believed, but his father was a Greek, right? And then so Christians were going to say, well, you Hebrew Israelites, you say that you have to be from, your father has to be an Israelite for you to be, grafted, not grafted, but for you to be a part of God's family. And that's why, God in Christ in the New Testament says, well, his mother was a Jew, but his father was a Greek, but he was a disciple. He was accepted into the family of being a spiritual Israelite, right? That's things that they'll say, right? Well, his father was a Greek, so he couldn't have been a bloodline Jew because his father was a Greek. And that's exactly what they'll say, right? Well, we're going to break down what is the difference, if there is, between a Jew and a Greek. Is it a big difference? Is it a small difference? Let's get into it, right? A lot of times, and I like to note too that these verses that mention Greeks, right? First of all these verses, that's just 1 and 2, most Christians, like, you won't, it'll be hard to find one Christian who's well aware of all these verses and has actually looked into all these verses. They might just know Galatians 3 and 8, neither Jew nor Greek, right? A more studied Christian might go to like Acts 16 or Galatians 2 and 3, right? But they will focus on Greek, 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 Greek. What about everybody else? What about Persians? What about Medes? What about Babylonians? What about the Hittites and Jebusites and Persianites and all the ites? If you're not a Jew or a Greek, are you out of luck? Right? It's crazy. But without further ado, let me stop sharing my screen and let me share something else. Matter of fact, I think it was on the same screen. All right, here we go. Boom. Let's not start at the conclusion. No, let's start at the beginning. That's where I left off when I was putting this presentation together. Can I go in presentation mode? Oh, that's cool. All right. put this little Google Doc together while I was at work earlier this afternoon, trying to organize my thoughts, right? But you all see the title, The History of the Hellene Jews by yours truly. All right, let's get into it. Right. Jews first come into contact with Greeks, right? So this is the first interaction between Jews and Greeks, right? It's the book of Amos, chapter 1, verse 6. Thus saith the Lord God, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they carried away captive the whole captivity to deliver them up to Edom. But I will send a fire on the wall of Gaza, which shall devour the palaces thereof. And I will cut off the inhabitants of Ashdod from Ashdod, and him that holdeth the scepter from Ashkelon. And I will turn mine hand against Ekron, and the remnant of the Philistines shall perish, saith the Lord God. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Tyrus, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they delivered up the whole captivity to Edom, and remembered not the brotherly covenant. But I will send a fire on the wall of Tyrus, which shall devour the palaces thereof. Right? So what the prophet Amos is prophesying of is he's prophesying saying because the people of Gaza and the people of Tyrus and of Tyre, right? Because of them selling Israelites to the Edomites, they will be punished, right? And this is after the time of King Solomon, because it says, and remember not the brotherly covenant. Damn it. And remember not the brotherly covenant, right? The covenant that Solomon, right? The treaty and agreements that Solomon had made with the nations round about him, right? But this is obviously the Amos is during the time of King Uzziah, right? So this is well after the split of the northern and southern kingdom, going into the chronicles of the different kings of Israel and Samaria and of Judah and Jerusalem, right? Let's get the next source, Joel 3, verses 4 through 6. And it goes and reiterates the same thing. Yeah, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre? Tyre and Tyrus is the same, right? It's the same place. O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coasts of Palestine, right, which includes Gaza. Will you render me a recompense? And if ye recompense me swiftly and speedily, I will return your recompense unto your own head. Because ye have taken my silver and gold, and have carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold to the Grecians, that ye might remove them far from their borders. So we see here, Joel is the prophet Joel is prophesying an account, right? The same account that the prophet Amos is accounting in Amos 1. But we notice in Amos 1, right, how it refers to them as Edom, right? Gaza delivered them to Edom, Tyrus delivered them to Edom. But when Joel is recounting this same historical event, he mentions them as the Grecians, right? This is one account right here to go and prove and to prove that these Greek Europeans are in fact Edomites, right? Because Joel calls them Grecians, but Amos calls them Edom, right? They're Edomites. And then there's another, you can go throughout the lineage of Alexander the Greek or the Great and how he descends from the dukes of Edom, right? But that's a whole nother topic nonetheless, right? But we see here that Amos, right, and Joel. So Amos, just to give some historical, matter of fact, let me see the next slide before I get into it. All right, boom. Yep, that's exactly what I was going to get to. All right. So when did this Greek slave trade of Jews happen, right? The prophet Amos was active circa 791 through 739 BC before Christ, during the reign of King Uzziah, right? As in Amos 1 and 1. Amos 1 and 1 says he reigned during the king of Uzziah. This is also a Britannica source for the contemporary time period in which Amos and King Uzziah lived, right? This was before the Assyrian captivity, right? So before before the more well-known diasporas in biblical history, right? This is before that. The time period of Joel is still a topic of debate. Some scholars say that he was active around 835 circa BC. mainly due to a lack of the mention of the Assyrians and the Babylonians, right? So some scholars say that Joel was in the 5th century. Some say he was in the 4th. Some say he was in the 3rd, right? But well, why most scholars say that he was in the 7th or the 8th before the time of Amos is due to the lack of the Assyrians or the Babylonians getting mentioned. Because after the time of Amos, right, and then when you get into the prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Nehemiah, Ezekiel, all of them, right, all the major prophets from then on out mention Assyria and Babylon, right, all of them. So that's why most scholars will agree and say that Joel was before the Assyrian captivity as well, right? So this is an important thing to notice. Joel and Amos are both talking about Israelites being sold to the Greeks, right? During or around, we can say around the 7th century, right? 700 years before Christ, Greeks were buying and contributing into the slave trade of Israelites, right? And here's another source right here, right? It says the first date in Greek history is 776 BC. It says BCE here because that's the modern translation before Common Era, but BC before Christ. I still prefer to use that, right? The first date in Greek history is 776 BC, the year of the first Olympic Games. It was computed by 5th century BC researcher called Hippas, or whatever, whatever, right? Um, it was a Greek researcher and a Greek writer, right? This is the Britannica source, right? This source has two sources in itself. Britannica is the source in which Britannica lists this Greek historian or this Greek writer's source, right? Now, mind you, Greek, the history of these European Greeks didn't start at 776, but this is when they can this is like the first pivotal moment in their history when they were well established and they already established themselves. So at this time, the kingdoms like Macedonia was being established, the city of Athens, Sparta, and things of that sort. This is around the time when they're like, okay, that Greek territory in the Aegean Sea, they had a lock on that territory and that land, and they built kingdoms and they became uh, like steady with themselves and in their kingdom, right? So Greeks were in a strong position during contemporary with the time of Amos and Joel, where they both mention Israelites being sold to them. So this is about 400 years before the Hellenistic period. We see Israelites or Jews being spread far from their borders throughout Greek territories on the other side of the Mediterranean, right? So this is the first instance in which Jews are being exposed to the people of Greece, right? Let's keep going. The destruction of Gaza and Tyre. The complete fulfillment of Amos 1, verses 6 to 10 took place in 332 BC when Alexander the Great, right, sacked the land of Tyre. Alexander went on to siege Gaza around late 332 to 333 BC, thus bringing into completion the prophecy in Amos chapter 1, right? Every scholar, when you do your research and look on, right, every scholar will say that the complete fulfillment of Amos 1 happened with Alexander and his conquest when he um and it you can look up the detailed accounts of his of his siege of Tyre and his siege of Gaza, right? But exactly what the Most High in the book of Amos said was going to happen to Tyre and Zidon, Alexander was the fulfillment of that recompense on those people for selling Israelites to the Grecians. Ironically, the Most High used a Greek to punish other nations for selling us to the Greeks, right? That's hilarious when you think about it like that, right? But so we see, so depending, right? Because I'm not saying specifically when this Greek slave trade took place, but we have a timeline from 333 BC and around the 3rd century, right, BC, and the 7th century BC. This time period is before the Hellenistic period, where during that time period, it's at least a few hundred years, give or take, where Jews were being sold. They weren't being sold for 200 years, but I'm saying like 200 years, a couple hundred years before the rise of the Greek as becoming a world dominant power, right? Because they didn't really spread outside, that the little land they had on the other side of the Aegean Sea till Alexander. So they had their little territories there, right? In Greece, Athens, Sparta, right? So before they spread across the whole Middle East side of the world, right? They were buying and selling in trade of Jews and Israelites, right? That's an important note to keep in mind. With the rise of the Greeks taking place in the 7th century BC, and with Amos being active during the 7th century BC, along with the fulfillment of the prophecy of Amos 1 taking place in 332 BC, we can conclude that the Israelites or Jews first came into contact with the Greeks before the 3rd century. So this is hundreds and hundreds of years, a few hundred years before the time of the apostles. Because the apostles is after the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, right? So this is several hundred years before Paul and him writing letters to these Greeks, or him going to these Greeks, right? Jews' second run-in with Greeks, the Maccabean period. The Maccabean revolt of 167, right, 167 to 160 BC, was a Jewish uprising in Judea against the repression of I don't know how to pronounce this correctly, but the repression of this empire, right? The revolt was led by a country priest called Matthias, and his military followers became known as Maccabees. Successful, Jerusalem was captured and the Temple of Jerusalem reconstructed or reconsecrated, an act still commemorated today in the Jewish Hanukkah festival. This is where we get the Feast of Dedication from, in the Feast of Hanukkah, right? Which you won't find anywhere unless you read about it in the Book of Maccabees, which was taken out of the King James canon, right? But this is the origin of that festival, right? But let's see what is this empire, right? Let me share my screen real quick. Boom, right? We see here worldhistory.org, right? Close this message. Annoying. Right. It says this empire that the Maccabees are fighting against was set up from 312 to 63 BC. So this empire had about a 300-year reign. Was the vast political entity established by the first Nicanor. I can't pronounce this name correctly, so I don't want to say it wrong. Right, the first Nicanor, victor or unconquered, 358 through 358 to 281 BC. So his reign was through 358 to 281 BC. Then we have from 305 to 281 BC. Right, there's another account. One of the generals of Alexander the Great, who claimed a part of his empire after Alexander's death in 332 BC, right? When Alexander died, he left no certain successors to his kingdom, but allegedly claimed it should go to the strongest, right? And then he departed the kingdom amongst his generals, right? So this was the empire that the Maccabees were revolting against, right? And the empire had control of the Syrian territory, which the empire included uh, Palestine, all the coast of Palestine, including Israel, and those territories, right? So that's who the Maccabees were fighting, right? So now let's get back to the presentation, right? And if y'all want, like this presentation is like not as detailed as I could make it if I was officially presenting this like in a debate. But if y'all want this those slide docs, um, just let me know and I'll see if I can get them to y'all, and that way y'all can have them. Every link I have in there, y'all can click on and open up. All right, back to the presentation. Boom. All right, this is the link where I just got that from. First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 1. And it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, whom came out of the land of Chittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead first over Greece. Right? So Alexander was the first to reign over a unified Greece, right? Because throughout Greek history, even after Alexander, Greeks had city states, right? Athens was its own city state. Sparta was its own city state. Um, those are just the two main city states of Greece. I don't know off the top of my head, but either way, we've seen it all throughout history, right? City states throughout the Greek Empire, right? First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 10, right? So mind you, um, did I get okay, my bad. All right, so right, Alexander, he reigned from 332 BC, right? After because that's when he died, right? But the Maccabees was around 167, 160. So right here in the first verse of Maccabees in the first chapter, it's the Maccabees are recounting a history that took place roughly 200 years before this point in time that they're dealing with, right? So at this point in time, 200 years have passed with Israel. Kinda, I know the same thing, bro. That's why I hated school because it moved too fast. But on my studies on my own, I can write as much as I want with my own time. So I got you. I get it. I'm gonna send it to you. But so yeah, so we see about 200 years that Israel was under Greek occupation. Alexander conquest Tyre and Zidon and the whole coast of Palestine. He took out the Persian and Medes. So matter of fact, let me get a map of Alexander's empire. I had it on my computer earlier, but I closed it. Wasn't sure if I was um gonna use it. Let's see, Alex. All right, boom. Here it is. All right, let me share my screen. Just so y'all can get a visual, because I myself am a visual learner, which is why I just did this little presentation. All right, share my screen again. Where's the tab? Oh, here it is. Boom. All right, so here's a map of Alexander's empire, right? Zoom in. So here is Macedonia, here's Athens, here's Sparta, right? So before Alexander, right, you see all this right here is Alexander's territory that he conquered. Before Alexander, the Greeks were only subject to Macedonia, Athens, Sparta, right? This whole territory right here, right? It may be a little bit of this territory as well, too, right? But before Alexander, this was pretty much all that they had, right? Mind you, before Alexander, the people of Greece were dealing in trade with the people of Tyre and Zidon over here, selling us. Hundreds of years before Alexander. Alexander then comes and destroys the whole coast of Palestine and conquers it. And that territory includes Israel. So from Alexander to the time of the Maccabees, right, in the first Maccabees, it's 200 years that Israel was under Greek occupation, right? 200 years is a long time to be under the influence of another nation, right? Hell, when you read about the diaspora to Babylon, right? Babylonian captivity was 70 years, right? That's what the prophet Jeremiah says, right? Daniel lived through the Babylonian Empire to the start of the Persian Empire, right? Daniel was taken away into captivity to Babylon, and 7 years passed, and then the decree, King Cyrus or Cyprus of Persia lets a decree all the Israelites can return back to their land. Daniel stays in the Babylonian territory, which is now under Persian and the rule of the Persian and Medes, right? Which is this middle area right here, right? But he stays. right? But not only him, right? Every scholar agrees to the fact that um, though a vast majority of Israelites migrated back to Jerusalem into Israel, right, and a remnant also was left, right. But a remnant also decided to stay in Babylon. Daniel wasn't the only one that stayed, but he's one of the most key prominent figures, right? There's many extra biblical sources from Babylonian texts and Persian texts that mention Israelite communities in that area, even after the time of the exile, right? And a lot of scholars explain why that is when they go to verses in Jeremiah, where Jeremiah tells the people of Israel to set roots in Babylon, right? It tells them to have families, to get land, to plow the land, right? So after 70 years, right? And the point that I'm getting at is that 70 years is here to give you a better understanding. 70 years is from my abuela, my grandmother, to my father to me, right? Because my abuela, she's in her mid 70s, so about 60 years, right? So that means there were children being born and raised in Babylon, raised from childhood all the way up to adulthood to the time where they're having their own kids, never seeing Jerusalem, never seeing or knowing their homeland. They know who they are, they know where they came from, they kept the faith, right? But they've never seen Jerusalem or the homeland. And they decide to stay in Babylon with Daniel, right? It's like me, my abuela came to the States, my grandmother came to the States when she was 18, right? She had my father. My father had 4 kids, right? 3 boys, 1 girl. My brother has a kid. My sister has 2 kids. None of my father has. He stayed in America, never went back to Costa Rica. All of his kids, me and my siblings, we stay here. We never went back to Costa Rica. And my nephews and nieces, they're all in the States, right? It's like imagine if Costa Rica put out a decree and say all Costa Ricanos can return back if they so choose. And me, my generation, my father's generation, and my father's grandkids' generations, right? My nieces and nephews are their generation. We decided to stay in the United States because we've never known Costa Rica, right? That's the same concept with Daniel and Babylon, right? They decided to stay in that area, which um so like I'm trying to remember why I just went into that sidebar. I know I have it in my notes for something, but what relevance was that with Alexander? Yeah. The point is, 200 years had passed. So 60 years had passed for my family, right? 70 years in the time of Jeremiah, right? So we see just after 70 years, there were populations of what they call Jewish, right? Populations of Israelite communities throughout the Persian Media Empire that stayed and didn't go back to Jerusalem. And we further know that when we get to the book of Esther and Mordecai and his family, right? When you read the book of Mordecai, it says that they were Jews throughout the whole Persian Media Empire, right? And the Persian Media Empire was from India to Ethiopia, right? Pretty much all the land you see here with Alexander, except the Greek territories, right? So we see Jews were dispersed throughout this whole middle area, right? All because some Israelites stayed after 70 years and not being around their homeland. Imagine 200 years of being spread out throughout the land and your homeland being under foreign occupation to the Greeks. So even if they weren't in Jerusalem or they were in Jerusalem, they were under the Greek occupation, right? Just keep that in mind. 200 years, that's a long time. Not to mention all the time before when they were being transported by Tyre and Zidon to the Greeks. This is when the Greeks started their Hellenistic conquest. 200 years, right? So 200 years later, we go to First Maccabees, verse 10, right? So let me stop sharing my map. Let's go back to the little slideshow. Share. There we go. Right? Give or take. More specifically, it's about 137 years, and we're about to see that, right? Still a very long time. Verse Maccabees chapter 1, verse 10. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been in hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks, right? This now so king, right? Antiochus, he was part of that empire that we read about in the first slide for the Maccabees. This king came from this empire, right? So this was one of the kingdoms of the Greeks, right? Out of several kingdoms of Greeks throughout the whole Greek Empire, right? So 137 years later, we now see this guy whose kingdom was from Syria to Israel, and then he later went to try to go and conquer Egypt. Even the Maccabees state that, right? So 137 years of Israelites witnessing and living around Greek culture. What happened? Verse 11. In those days went out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So here we see Israelites in that time. Hey, listen, the Greeks are all around us. They control this whole territory. And if we don't get in line with them, man, they make stuff harder for us. They put trade embargoes, right? They oppose us, they oppress us, right? Let's make some sort of covenant agreement with them. Let's join with them because they rule the world, right? Let's join with them, right? Essentially, it's like what America does to Cuba, and but Cuba just isn't giving up, right? But unfortunately, our ancestors in the Maccabees, a lot of during the time of the Maccabees, a lot of them, they're saying, you know what, Greece, they're all around us. Let's just give in. If you can't beat them, join them, right? Let's keep going. First Maccabees chapter 1, verse 12. So this device pleased them well. Then certain people went then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinance of the heathen. Whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, who and were sold to do mischief. This is one reason why you see Paul hearken to these Greek people throughout the Greek territories, the covenant and the promise pertaining to them, right? But verse 4 is crazy. It says, so inside the borders of Jerusalem, we have many people of Jerusalem conforming to the ways of the Greeks, so much that they're building places to where they can go and lift weights butt naked. Because that's what a gymnasium is. That's what a place of exercise in. And it says, according to the customs of the heathen, the Greek customs for exercising and working out at gymnasiums, the word gymnasium is Greek for naked exercise. So our wicked ancestors loved the wickedness of these heathens, man, like crazy, right? Like no Diddy for real. Like it's madness that our ancestors were so drawn to that, right? So they were willingly assimilating into the Greek lifestyle and culture, and building buildings after their manner, build after the customs of those manners, and partaking in their of the Greek customs, and rejecting their own custom willingly. Let's continue. First Maccabees 41 through 46. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. This is where this is another example of the Hellenistic process, right? Verse 42. And everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yeah, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, and sacrificed unto idols, and profaned the Sabbath. For the king had sent letters by messengers up unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judea, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings in the temple, and they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people. So now we see the Israelites agreed to it, but also the king Antiochus made a decree, a letter saying, follow these, leave all your customs and be Greek. You must be Greek. You must be Greek. You must be Greek. That's what was happening, right? That's the whole concept in the history of the Hellenization period, right? Where the Greeks were spreading all the way across the territories they conquered and forcibly forcing the people to assimilate to the Greek lifestyle and culture. A better visualization to think of it is think about the conquistadores and the Spaniards and when they came to the Americas, right? What did they do to um, our tribes, right? What did they do to Puerto Rico, right? To the Taínos and the Arawaks. What did they do to the Mayas and the Mexicas and the Totecs in Mexico, right? Worship this cross or die, right? These Europeans, they're nothing new. They just follow the ways of their ancestors. These Edomites are nothing new. The same way they forced their Christian ideology through us through the Inquisition was the same way they were forcing the Greek ideology through our ancestors in Jerusalem and in Judea, right? And many of our people accepted it and were glad about it. Next slide. Verse 47. They set up altars and groves and chapels of idols and sacrificed swine's flesh and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanliness and profanation. This is why you see Paul in the time of the apostles harping hard, like we read in those verses earlier, to the circumcised and to the uncircumcised, to the Jew and to the Greek. You see now a clearer picture is being painted of why Paul was going to these people who were uncircumcised. Christians will say they were uncircumcised because they weren't ethnic Israelites. But we see here in Maccabees, and this is why Christians hate this book. Christians hate all of the Apocrypha in general. They say it's not God inspired, right? So they just throw it out, which who are they to say it was God inspired or not, right? Why don't we take all the records we have and see if they hold together? And so far, the records, the whole canon holds together, right? Let's keep reading, right? Verse 40, verse 49. To the end that they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. So now we have Israelites under Greek occupation willingly and forcibly assimilating to the Greek lifestyle and culture to the goal and end of forgetting who they are and where they came from. Verse 50. Whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die, just like what the Spaniards did, right? So we see where not all the people of Jerusalem and Judea, not all the people of Israel were willing to assimilate to the Greeks. A lot of them were. But even the ones who didn't want to assimilate, well, now they had no choice. They either assimilate or die. And throughout the Maccabees, you can read accounts of certain people that chose to die with honor rather than to defile themselves with swine's flesh or other abominable things. Right? They were real gangsters with this shit. Like it was real like Hathaways and Hathaway in Cuba, right? A Taino who chose to die rather than to submit, right? Some of our ancestors during the time of Maccabees chose death before dishonor, right? But the ones that didn't choose to die, they either swallowed their pride and assimilated or they willfully assimilated. All right, let's keep reading. Second Maccabees chapter 4, verse 15. Not setting by the honors of their fathers, but liking the glory of the Grecians best of all. Our people just love these Edom, bro. Our people, blacks and Hispanics, to this very day right now, we uphold Caucasians on such a high effing pedestal. It's not even funny. We hold themselves to a higher standard that we wish we can be on. Our ancestors was doing the same thing during the time of Maccabees. Just like King Solomon says, there is nothing new under the sun, and history repeats itself. You want to wonder where our people get their infatuation with these Caucasians today? It's because we get it from our ancestors because they was doing it way back then too. Being in awe over these weirdos, right? Let's keep reading. Second Maccabees chapter 6, verse 1. Not long after this, the king sent an old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers and not to live after the laws of God. Right? So now this is another decree, right, being sent to the Jews. specifically to the Jews. The decrees we said earlier was what the king in the Syrian area, right? The king that was over Antiochus, right? Over his kingdom in portion, he sent decrees to all the people in his kingdom and heathens. Now, the people sitting in Athens in their Senate offices in Athens specifically want to target the Jews in Israel, right? Verse 2, and to pollute also the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympus, and that in Gazrium, of Jupiter, the defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwelt in the place. Right? So now the temple is being modeled and fashioned after Greek mythology. So now we see there's a decree, another decree forcing Jews to forget all their laws of their ancestors, turn away from it, and also rename their holy temples after the names of their gods within the land of Israel. Verse 3, the coming in of this mischief was sore and grievous to the people, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles, who defied it with harlots and had to do with women with the circuit of the holy within the circuit of the holy place. And besides, they brought in things that were not lawful. Essentially, they turned the temple into a whorehouse, right? A decrepit whorehouse, right? The altar also was fulfilled with profane things, which the law forbiddeth. Verse 6, neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient feasts or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. We see this intense and heavy enforcing of the Greek lifestyle and culture over the people of Israel, over the population of the Jews. So now both sides of the coin, the Jews who wanted to convert and the Jews who didn't, both sides of the coin, the whole coin is being sucked in and assimilated into the Greek lifestyle culture. And the ones who did it were being put to death, right? And a law was made for someone that it was illegal for them to practice their birthright and their heritage. It was illegal for them to even call themselves a Jew. So now, this is over 150 something years, give or take, before the time of Christ. So we had like at least 100 years of Hellenization happening to our people before the Maccabean period, which is why they were so willing to convert, because they've been around these Greeks for over 100 years and liked what they did. And then the Greeks started turning their attention specifically towards Israel. So now, for let's say for at least 150 years before Christ, right? Mind you, 60 to 70 years is a long time. That's 3 generations, right? Just think of it, right? That's from my father to me to my nephews and nieces, right? It's 3 generations. And my brother's baby, he's gonna have no idea who he comes from because my brother's fully assimilated into the American lifestyle. Doesn't give a damn about where he comes from. He's not gonna raise his child to understand and take pride in where he comes from. And he's a Christian pastor, so all he cares about is Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. So that child is not gonna understand who the hell he is and where he comes from, because to him it doesn't, to my brother it doesn't matter, right? To these Christians it doesn't matter, right? That's just 60 years. Imagine 150 years. Not just 150 years of people living and not caring where they come from, but 150 years of you're not allowed to call yourself who you are. I could, when my nephew gets older, I can tell him, hey, look, man, you're Costa Rican, right? You come from, the same people as the Mayas, right? We the tribe of Zebulon, all that stuff, right? I can tell him, right? Because it's not illegal. So at least he has that opportunity and that chance. Our ancestors during this time, it was illegal for them to practice their heritage and their culture and their customs, and illegal to call themselves who they were. So if they're in a Greek occupied state, they're not allowed to call themselves who they are. And their temples are now being called and after the manner and fashions of the people of Greece. What are the people of Jerusalem and Judah going to start calling themselves? They're going to call themselves Greeks. The decree earlier we saw by Antiochus, it said all should be one people. He wanted all to be Greeks. Let's keep going. What is Hellenization, right? This is definition from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Hellenized or Hellenizing, right? Intransitive verb. To become Greek or Hellenistic, transitive verb. To make Greek or Hellenistic in form or culture. So to become or to make, to choose or to be forced, right? Merriam-Webster dictionary, right? So to be Hellenized is becoming a Greek by force or by choice. So the people of Judah and Jerusalem were being Greeks under both manners and fashions. But let's get what the Greek definition of Hellen from a Greek source, right? This is Isocrates or Isocrates. He's a 4th century Greek writer, right? And he writes, and if a man should partake of our culture, let him be called Hellen, right? Let him be called Hellen. And then this is the source for it, right? So, according to the definition of the word of Hellenization, and according to the Greeks themselves, if you practice the lifestyle, culture, and custom of the Greeks, then you can be called a Greek, and you are a Greek. People of India, right? The dark-skinned, dot-head Indians, right? They can call themselves Greeks and become Greeks if they practice the lifestyle of the Greeks. The same way the Europeans in Athens were Greeks, but they're not the same bloodline. They're not the same race, but they're Greeks, right? It's essentially what's happening. Let's keep going. What is the Greek word for Greek? Instead, Greeks refer to themselves as, which this is the word Greek in Greek, but in English it's Hellenes. The word Greek in itself comes from the Latin word Gracie, if I'm saying that correctly, and through Roman influence has become the common root word for Greek people and culture in most languages. In English, however, both Greek and Hellenic are used, right? So the specific sounding and the specific word Greek in itself comes from the Roman Latin, right? The actual word for Greek in Greek is Hellenes, right? And we just read earlier, if any man should partake in our culture, let him be called Hellene, let him be called Greek, right? The Greeks called themselves and their land Hellen, right? Hellene. I stated in the previous slide that anyone who simply adopted the Greek lifestyle culture was called a Hellen, right? What is the Greek word for Greek in the New Testament? There are two words in the New Testament used for the word Greek. This word right here, which is Hellen, like we just read earlier. So now we know what this word here means, right? But there's another word used for just translated as Grecian, more specifically in the New Testament. That's Hellenistes, right? Both words have the same definition and meaning. However, Hellenistes is specifically in reference to speak Greek Jews, right? So the word Hellene in and of itself can refer to anybody and everybody who adopts the Greek lifestyle and custom, right? Everybody. But the word Hellenistes is specifically in reference to Israelites who speak Greek, right? Conclusion. From the evidence shown in the previous presentation, we can see the extreme and huge impact Hellenization had on the Jews. From the evidence here, we see that anyone, no matter if he is a Greek or Hellen by bloodline, or someone who adopts the Greek/Hellen lifestyle and culture, either by choice or force, can be called Greek or Hellene. From the evidence shown here, we see how many Jews were willing to choose to convert to being Greek, and we see the ones who weren't willing but were forced to convert under the punishment of death, right? So we have at least 150-year time period, right? That's it's at least about, I would say, at least 7, 8 generations, which is a long time, right? Great 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 grandmother and great 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 grandfather type of time period, right? All the way down to the people who were being alive during the time of Christ, right? The only reason why, when you get to the time of Christ, there's still um, an Israelite identity present is because of the Maccabean revolt. The Maccabean revolt they're the ones who went to war against the Greeks. The Maccabees literally went to Rome because Rome during this time period was a new player in the game of world history, right? The Greeks were more well established and had their kingdom, right? And Rome and Italy and Sicily and those and that, and the other side of Greece, right? they were a new player, right? But the Maccabees were going to Rome and trying to secure deals and treaties with Rome to fight against the Greeks, right? And then eventually the Greeks took over the Western Mediterranean. And let me see on my notes. I know I wrote it down here. Yeah. So, um, right, another conclusion, right? That I have in my notes. Alexander reigned from 336 to 322 BC, right? First Maccabees chapter 1, verses 1 through 7, right? The time period of the Maccabees is circa 178 to 161 BC. Rome started to spread across the Mediterranean circa 264 to 146 BC. So during the time of Maccabees, Rome was growing in power. They had complete control of the Western Mediterranean. During the Maccabees, both the Romans and the Greeks were powerful, right? So for over 200 years of Israel being in Greek-controlled territory when King Antiochus came, right? That's 169 years, give or take, of Israelites being Hellenized before Christ. When Rome took over Greece circa 146 BC, about 30 years, give or take, after the time of the Maccabees, right? The Greek culture, language, the Greek culture and language was dominant over the Roman territories, right? Because we know that the Romans and the Greeks, they're the same people, right? They're the exact same people, right? And so the culture and identity of the Greeks took over all of Rome, right? That's why Jupiter, the temple Jupiter, Jupiter to the Greeks is Zeus to the Romans. It's the same god, just different names because the Romans were speaking Latin, right? But when they started taking over the Greek territories, the Greek language in itself was also remaining the most dominant. Latin in the language of the Romans wasn't really becoming more dominant until after, way after the time of Christ, right? It says the Greeks continued to revolt against Rome even to 88 BC, 88 years before Christ, right? Even though Rome was dominant from 146 BC all the way to and after the time of Christ, the Greek identity and culture was strong in all the Greek provinces and areas, even though it was under the Roman uh, occupation, so to speak, right? So we see that the word Helen, which is used in all those verses that I read earlier, Galatians 3 and Romans 1 and Romans 10 and Colossians 3 and Galatians 2 and Acts 16, all those verses are Helen in the Greek, right? Helen. That word doesn't, now that we know the history of the word, that anybody can be called Helen, a Christian can't go and say, oh, see, that's a non Israelite, off rip. And then when we see this huge Hellenistic period during the time of the Maccabees, huge Greek influence within the land of Israel, we can see how Paul might say, or not might, but we can now understand why Paul would say there's no difference between a Greek and a Jew, because both Greeks and Jews were the same that he was talking about, were the same bloodline of people in the same land, just living two different lifestyles, living life two different ways. Some who stayed in the practice and customs and understanding of Jerusalem, of Judah, the ways of the Most High, what they call Jewry, the ones living after the manners of the Greeks, right? And especially after the Maccabean revolt, there was a big disdain, borderline hatred between the Jews and Jewry and the Israelites who were living under the Greek customs and culture, right? Let's see. Let me get some. I got some more stuff that I'm about to go into. Gonna be too much longer though. Let's see. Okay, right. So I went into the Hellenistics and I went into the word for Helen, right? So now off rip, when you go to those verses I mentioned earlier in Galatians and Romans, Colossians and Acts and all that, right? A Christian just can't say off rip, not Israelite. See, not Israelite. They would have to go and prove into the text who are those Greeks, because according to history and archaeology, the word Helen can be applied to anybody regardless of bloodline. And like I stated at the beginning of this video, we take the position that those Greeks are Israelites. Now, how do we know that? I'm gonna get into a couple. I'm gonna get into a couple verses demonstrating that. So let me go to back to the blue letter. Let me share my screen. See, now when you the verses that I read in the beginning of this video, when we harmonize it and use hermeneutics properly, right, with the verses that I'm about to get now, we can understand what Paul was talking about when he was mentioning these Greeks, right? Let's go to the book of James, chapter 1, verse 1. James, the brother of Christ, Pisto Christo. The book of James, chapter 1, verse 1. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greeting. So everything in the book of James, a Christian can't go and say and use that's talking about anybody else other than the Israelites. James specifically said to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. He even mentioned just to the Jews, because the Jews are mainly the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, right? Majority of the rest of the tribes, right? Which we say 10 tribes, but if the Southern Kingdom's 3 and the 10 tribes are 10, that's 13, right? Levi was split amongst the nations, right? Levi is part of the 10 tribes that went away, right? Even though the majority of the 10 tribes of Israel dipped from that side of the world during after the Assyrian captivity, right? During the time of Assyria and Babylon, circa 700 to 500 BC, right? Even though it's 500 before Christ, we can go through the scriptures where there's still remnants of the tribes of Zebulun and other tribes of the northern kingdom that actually went back to Jerusalem, Israel, to keep the Passover and tried to reunite and was reuniting with the people of Judah, right, in Jerusalem, a remnant, right? And then not to mention the people of Judah and Jerusalem that are being sold to the Grecians before the Assyrian captivity, so to speak, right? So we see there's still remnants of the 12 tribes in that Mediterranean Middle East side of the world during the time of James and Christ, even though the bulkhead was already in the Americas, right? So James is even being more specific to the 12 tribes. He's not even just saying to the Jews, to the 12 tribes, right? Let's get another verse. Let's go to the book of John, chapter 7, verse 35. Then said the Jews amongst themselves, whither will he go? Whither will he go that we should not find him? Will he go unto the dispersed among the Gentiles and teach the Gentiles? Right, this is talking about Christ, right? Christ, they're saying, where is Christ going to go? He's going to go to the dispersed amongst the Gentiles? Because now we know it's well established that Jews were dispersed all throughout. You can go from India to Ethiopia, all throughout the Mediterranean. From the Persian captivity they're spread about, the Babylonian captivity they're spread about, the Assyrians captivity they're spread about, and then the Greeks came over and took over all that land and territory. But Israel was spread all throughout that territory, right? So now he's saying, is Christ going to the dispersed who are among the Gentiles and teach the Gentiles? Let's see what this Greek word for Gentile is in this passage here. Let's just see if it's a familiar word. Here we go. Will he go to dispersed amongst the what? The Hellene. And teach the Hellenes. So here we see that the New Testament here is translated into the English word Gentiles, but it really should be Greek. It really says, is he going to go to dispersed amongst the Greek and teach the Greek? Because that's what it says, Hellene. That's the Greek word for Greek. So in this verse here, even the word Gentiles doesn't mean nations. Because the word Gentiles means nations. In this passage, that should really say Greeks, right? Because that's what this is talking about. Other passages where it mentions Gentiles, depending on what word is there, it's the Greek word ethnos or the Greek word Hellene. Ethnos means nations or ethnicity. Hellene means Greek. So in this specific passage here, it's specifically talking about Greeks, right? But will he go to dispersed amongst the Greeks and teach the Greeks? Obviously, at this point in time, they were well understanding the fact that their fellow Israelites and Jews were spread throughout the Greek provinces and territories and living under the assimilated Greek culture, right? Let's continue. Let's go to Romans 9. Romans 9 is it's pretty much a nail in the coffin. If Paul's going to all these Greeks, and it's supposedly non-Israelites, why would he say this? I say the truth in Christ, I lie not. My conscience also bear me witness in the Holy Ghost, that I have great heaviness and continual sorrow in my heart. For I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ, for my brethren, my kinsmen, according to the flesh, who are Israelites. See, it's funny he has to say according to the flesh, right? Paul's writing to these Greeks and to these supposedly non-Israelites and letting them know they are my family according to the flesh. So they are bloodline. Who are bloodline Israelites? So whom pertaineth the adoption, right? The next week we can go into the grafting in and to the adoption, right? But either way, the adoption is for them, the glory is for them, the covenants is for them, and the giving of the law and the service of God and the promises. Who are the fathers, and as whom as concerning the flesh Christ came, who is over all. God bless me forever. Amen. God bless. Yeah. How can a Christian harmonize James 1 and 1, John 7 and 35, and Romans 9 with their understanding of what Greek means with all the other passages that I read in Galatians, Colossians, and Acts about the Greeks? You can't harmonize their understanding with what's being read here because it doesn't match up. And the problem with Christians is that instead of harmonizing the scriptures, they'll just cut and run and go to another verse. But it's like there's broken pieces. Your understanding in the verse that you're getting versus the other verses that explicitly don't align with your understanding. It's crazy. James 1 and 1, John 7:35, and Romans 9 explicitly, Christians can't go to those passages and say it's talking about non-Israelites. They can't. But they'll go to other verses that talk about Greeks and other verses where they can get some wiggle room where it's not as definitive. But how do you harmonize those verses with like Galatians 3 and 28, where it says there's neither Jew nor Greek? How do you harmonize that with Romans 9 or James 7 and 5 or James 1 and 1? How do you harmonize their understanding if nor Jew nor Greek is talking about non-ethnic Israelites versus ethnic Israelites? You can't harmonize that. It doesn't make sense. But instead of harmonizing it, they cut and run. It's a bloody mess. Let's go to Romans 11. All right. I'm not going to go too deep into breaking down Romans 11. It's another passage that Christians go to try to prove the replacement theology. I'll dip into this deeper next week, right? My point, I just want to harp on. It says Romans 1 and 1. I say then, have God cast away his people? Because Christians say God cast away Israel and replaced them with everybody. Has God cast away his people? God forbid. For I am also an Israelite of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. Hey, just like we always say, I'm a Hebrew Israelite from the tribe of such and such. Paul said the same thing. I'm a Hebrew Israelite from the tribe of Benjamin. Right? God has not cast away his people, which he foreknew. Right? You see? God did not cast away Israel. Let's go to verse 26. The conclusion of Paul's teachings here. And so all Israel shall be saved, as is written. There shall come out of Zion the deliverer, which is Yahawah, Christ, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, which also take away their sins. The covenant was given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All Israel shall be saved. The deliverer out of Zion. Turn away ungodliness from Jacob, the Israelites. Paul is concluding that all these, right, the falling away, the wild olive branch, these Gentiles, right, the wild olive branch that fell off and became wild and wicked were the wicked Israelites and Jews that were willingly assimilating and converting to the Greek lifestyle and customs and culture. That's what Romans 11 is about. Were those Gentiles and Greeks who are really Israelites. And that's why Paul concludes by saying, so all Israelites can be saved. Right? It's crazy. So now when you go back to let's go to Acts 16 and 1 again, like we read to earlier. So now when we go to Acts 16 and 1, then he came to Debris and to Lystria, and behold, a certain disciple was there, named Timotheus, the son of a certain woman. She was a Jewess and believed. She was in Jewry, but his father was a Greek. Let's see what this Greek word is. His father was Hellene. And we know historically and contextually, Hellene can be applied to any ethnic race or bloodline. So essentially, his mother was an Israelite woman who practiced the law, statutes, and commandments, and she believed in the Most High in Christ. But his father was an unbeliever who lived after the manner and customs of the Greeks. That's what's happening there. And we know that through the prophecy, the history, and the archaeology that we just went through, right? That's how you harmonize it with all the other passages that explicitly say it's only for Israelites, right? Let's see. How long I've been going on for? Hour and 11 minutes? Oh, not that bad. I think I got through everything I was looking to get through tonight. Let me go over my notes real quick and see if I left anything out this week. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, this another point I want to make out, right? Which I don't gotta go through a whole presentation for these points, right? But matter of fact, there is another verse. There are multiple more verses I wanted to get. I thought I wrote them down, but I didn't. Oh, I did write it down, but I skipped it. Aha. It's literally the first verse I went to was James 1 and 1, but right in front of it, I have 1 Corinthians 10 and 1. This is the nail in the coffin, right? And how you harmonize everything correctly, right? Verse, right? Is it Corinthians? Yeah. Corinthians 10 1. So, mind you, matter of fact, before I read it, I'm going to do this. I'm going to look up the location of the Church of Corinth, right? Location of the Church of Corinth. All right, let's go to images. Corinth. Oh, this is crazy. This is hilarious. This is a great picture right here. Let me share my screen. This is amazing. Share screen. Location of the Church of Corinth. Look at this picture right here. Look at this. Look, there's Thessalonica. There's Athens. There's Sparta. There's Corinth. It's literally a city in the whole the homeland in the heart of the heartland, the heart of Greece. It's in the heartland of Greece, Corinth. There's Greeks here, Greeks in the Church of Corinth. And if you ask a Christian who was there in the Church of Corinth, they'll say it was Gentiles or Greeks because the Church of Corinth was literally in the capital, right by Greece, right? But let's see who Paul says the people of the Church of Corinth, who they were. Moreover, brethren, I will not that you should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea. Paul is literally telling these Greeks, you are Israelites. He's literally reminding them that they're Israelites because they did not know. He says, brethren, I don't want you to be stupid or ignorant or unknowledgeable. I don't want you to not know that your ancestors came out of Egypt and was with Moses. That's what Paul's telling these Greeks in the Church of Corinth, that you're not Greek. You're not these Europeans. You're not these Edomites. You are the Israelites. That's what Paul's telling them right here in this church. And guess what? That's what we do every time Israelites go and hit the streets. You are not black. You are not Hispanic. You are an Israelite. Same thing Paul was doing. I'm hitting my table so loud my guitar is humming. Hilarious, right? But come on, man, you can't get around that. right? And so the other note that I was going to make, right? So Corinth is in Greece. The Church of Galatians, I mean, the Church of the Galatians and the Church of Galatia is in what is now that's in the middle of what is now Turkey, right? But Turkey was previously Greek territory. Let's see, the Church of Galatians. Where is it? Where's my, I have somewhere else. All the churches. Where is it? Either way, the Church of Ephesus was in a Greek territory. I'm trying to say I wrote down all the churches, man. Where did I write that at? Here we go. Boom. The churches of Galatia, Colossae, right? The Colossians, the Church of Ephesus, right? The Ephesians. All those churches, the Galatians, the Colossians, and the Ephesians, they were all located in what is now the country of Turkey, which at that point was a Greek territory, which is literally like a hopscotch and skipping away from the Church of Corinth. You just cross the short pass through the Aegean Sea, and you're in Turkey. Or you can walk the land connection going all the way up towards Macedonia and go to Turkey. Either way, right? Turkey is extremely close to Greece. So the Church of Galatia, the Church of Colossians, the Church of the Ephesians were all located in Greek territory of what is now modern day Turkey, right? And the Church of Corinth was in the capital, right next to the capital of these Greeks, next to Athens, right? Israelites spread throughout these Greek territories, spread throughout the diaspora, right? And next week we'll go deeper into the diaspora as well too as we did tonight. But tonight we're focusing on their history between the Greeks, right? So a Christian can't just go and read a New Testament verse that mentions the word Greek and say it's non-ethnic Israelites. The word Greek is applied to everybody, just by the same way the term American is applied to everybody. But how do I know what type of American I'm referring to? The context. So that's why you have African American. That's why you have Asian American or Chinese American or Japanese American, right? They're Americans, but they're from Japan. They're Americans, but they're from China, right? That's why you have so-called Latino American, right? They're Americans, but they're from Latin countries in the Western Hemisphere in the Americas. But they're not the same as these British guys that came off some boats wearing these goofy powdered wigs in the 1600s, right? They're not the same as those Americans. But those Asian people, those East Indians people, Persians, anybody who becomes an American citizen is now granted the title American, the same way anybody who adopted the Greek lifestyle custom was called a Greek. The Americans are just following the ways of their ancestors. The same way the Spanish did during the Inquisition, right? Hellenizing everybody, the Americans Hellenized everybody the same way in their in this territory and country. It's crazy. So a Christian can't say a Greek is a non-Israelite. The context dictates what kind of Greek is talking about. And the context is always Jews and Israelites. You can't get around ifs, ands, or buts about it. The Most High God only cares about us and our people to reestablish us. Great breakdown on how America and Greeks are used. Yeah, it's the same. And matter of fact, you know what? Let me give another example. You heard how I read how Paul said he was an Israelite from the seed of Abraham from the tribe of Benjamin. But Paul also said he identified as another nationality. All right, I'm gonna get that real quick, right? And then we're gonna wrap it up. Get exactly what book and chapter it's in. I probably didn't put the correct phrasing. Here, let me look it up real quick. Acts chapter 22. Okay, Acts chapter 22, starting at 28. Acts 22, 28. Right. So you remember how I went into how Paul said he was an Israelite from the tribe of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he was from the tribe of Benjamin, right? Let's start at 25, right? These are when Roman officials are coming to take Paul into custody, right? As they bound him with tongs, Paul said unto the centurion, right? A centurion is a Roman officer of 100 men. Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? So Paul is getting hassled by these Roman officials, and he's like, hey, I'm a Roman, right? Just like the same thing like in America, right? You have ICE that goes against mainly targeting Hispanic people, right? If they bust in my house right now and try to drag me away, I'm gonna pull out my passport real quick and be like, look, I'm American. I'm a citizen. I'm a citizen. I'm an American. I'm an American. You can just you can just come by and trash me around when I'm a citizen of a country who has laws that protect me, so to speak, right? That's essentially the card that Paul is pulling here. I'm a Roman. I'm a legal citizen. Why are you condemning me? Right. If Paul was undocumented, right, so to speak, like the issue in today in America, there would be no issue. ICE can come in and do whatever the hell they want and kick you out, right? But if you're an American, they can't do that. Verse 26. When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. So like, hey, yo, be careful, man. This man, he's a Roman. We can't do him bad. Like if a police pull me over, oh damn, we can't do this. He's a citizen. He's got rights, so to speak, right? And that's exactly what Paul's saying here. I'm a Roman. I got rights. And the captain, the centurion went to his captain. Hey, we can't toss him up because he's a Roman. Verse 27. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, tell me, art thou a Roman? And he said, yeah. So Paul was asked, you're a Roman? He's like, yeah, I'm a Roman. Verse 28. And the chief captain answered, with a great sum attained I this freedom. And Paul said, but I was free born. Now we understand what's going on. We have the United States of America, right? You have naturalized citizens, and then you have citizens who immigrate and go through the citizenship process. My abuela immigrated and went through the citizenship process. But my father, me, and all of us, we were born in the United States, so we are citizens. We were born free, right? That's what Paul said, right? He said, I was born free. The word free is italicized, so that doesn't appear in the manuscripts. So Paul's saying, I was born with this freedom, right? But the centurion, the captain is saying that he had to pay a great sum to get his freedom. So even the centurion, the captain, right, the chief captain, he wasn't even an ethnic Roman. He immigrated and assimilated to the Greek culture and had to pay a lot of money and probably a lot of time and energy and spent into integrating uh, into Roman citizenship. But Paul, he was born under Roman citizenship. But Paul also said that he was an Israelite from the tribe of Benjamin. These are things that Christians, for some reason, can't understand. They live in the United States of America, but can't understand the concept of immigration and citizenship. And if they do, they act like it's a new thing, like the Americans just invented citizenship. It's the same thing the Greeks were doing during the time of Paul and the Romans, right? So now you can't go to a verse that mentions a Greek or a Roman, which most of the verses mention Greeks, because the churches were out throughout Greek provinces. Right? All the churches were out throughout Greek provinces, right? The Western Mediterranean, the apostles and all the Israelites weren't really even dealing with, right? Was the main power of the Roman territories, right? When they went into what is now Spain and French and Portugal, when they were conquering the Britannia and those isles and areas, right? The Greek provinces that Rome had control over is where the Israelites were spread throughout. And that's where all the churches were throughout. But just because it says Greek or Roman doesn't denote a non Israelite. You have to be unstudied, um to think that way, right? And there's quick ways to break that down, like if you're in the streets, dealing with a Christian, but also like having the meat and the bones, which is what these sit downs are for, right? So with that, now we know and understand how Jews became Greeks and how Greeks doesn't mean non-ethnic Israelites, like they try to claim and see. So now Christians can't go to all those verses that mention Greeks to say non-Israelites. Nope, those are all out the window with that with because their understanding doesn't line up with history, prophecy, and the Bible, right? But with that, I'm gonna give all honor, all glory, all praises be due to the Most High God Yahawah. We do so in the name of His only begotten Son, Hamashiach Yahawah Shai. I'm gonna say Shalom, Shalom.